Hello, my name is Margaretta Walker. I am an undergraduate student in the biology department at George Mason University. My research advisor is Dr. David Luther, also of George Mason University. We studied Global Alliance for Zero Extinction sites and how they impact the conservation of threatened and near-threatened species. More species in the world are threatened with extinction today than at any other time in recent history. In an effort to prevent extinctions of the world's most at-risk species, a global initiative called the Alliance for Zero Extinction, or AZE, was started in 2005 by 88 non-governmental biodiversity conservation organizations. It identifies locations, known as AZE sites, which meet the criteria of endangerment, irreplaceability, and discreteness. This means the site contains a species classified as endangered or critically endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Natural Resources, or IUCN, Red List, contains more than 95% of that species' global population, and has a defined boundary. AZE sites are a subset of Key Biodiversity Areas, or KBAs. The AZE, which now consists of over 110 organizations, first published their global list of AZE sites in 2005 and updated it in 2010 and again in 2018. Pinpointing these locations helps governments, conservationists, donors, financial institutions, businesses, and investors to target conservation efforts and minimize destructive activities as a means to prevent global extinctions. In addition to conserving the most irreplaceable and vulnerable species in the world, AZE sites host many other species which might be threatened. While all AZE species are listed as endangered or critically endangered, there are also other threatened species in these categories that do not meet AZE criteria, along with species listed as vulnerable. In our assessment, we only included threatened and near-threatened mammals, birds, and amphibians with terrestrial habitat associations, as these taxonomic groups are comprehensively assessed under the IUCN Red List and have spatial ranges identified for each species. Governments are currently negotiating a new conservation strategy through the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. The post-2020 biodiversity framework was expected to be adopted at the CBD 15th Conference of the Parties, which was scheduled for October 2020 but has now been postponed to sometime in 2021. This strategy will contribute to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which include goals on biodiversity conservation. Understanding what works in conservation and why is vital to inform an effective post-2020 framework, particularly given the world's failure to meet most of the targets for tackling biodiversity loss set in 2010. The purpose of this research is to inform conservation efforts to prevent extinctions and safeguard threatened species around the world, and thereby contribute to global policy objectives. As AZE sites are recognized globally and have been mainstreamed in global financial organizations, they potentially receive greater conservation attention than less well-known sites. To explore the greater benefit of AZE sites to the conservation of threatened and near-threatened mammal, bird, and amphibian species around the world, in this project we assess how the level of protection of AZE sites has changed since 2005 and compare this to other KBAs. We also determine how many of those species, which are threatened or near-threatened but do not meet AZE criteria, have spatial ranges that overlap with AZE sites, and we assess protection of both AZE and non-AZE species. We also compared protection across the three taxonomic groups: mammals, amphibians, and birds. In order to assess all these factors, we created a multi-layered map in QGIS ArcMap. Spatial ranges of threatened and near-threatened mammals, birds, and amphibians were obtained from the IUCN, and a map of protected areas was obtained from the World Database on Protected Areas. These two layers were overlapped with the 2018 map of all KBAs, including AZE sites which were analyzed separately. My role specifically was to take the large quantities of data this produced and develop questions to make it useful, and then organize and analyze the data accordingly. When the list of global AZE sites was first compiled in 2005, there were 595 sites identified. As of the 2018 update, there are 868 sites. Of the original 595 sites, 254 no longer qualify as AZE. We evaluated 341 sites from 2005 which still qualified as AZE sites in 2018. Of the original 2005 AZE sites, 68% are now partially or completely protected, compared with 49% that were partially or completely protected in 2005, which is a nearly 20% increase. Comparing the 595 sites that existed in 2005 to all 868 sites identified today, you can see that 64% of current AZE sites are fully or partially protected, which is a 15% increase in protection overall. 36% of sites still lack any formal protection, however. We then compared AZE sites to other KBAs which do not qualify as AZE but which do contain at least one critically endangered or endangered mammal, bird, or amphibian. Mean protected area coverage for both types of sites has increased from about 29% to about 36% since 2005. The number of AZE sites that are completely protected has increased by about 4% since 2005, compared to about a 3% increase for non-AZE KBAs. This indicates that while AZE sites may receive more conservation attention in the media and government discussions than other KBAs, they do not necessarily receive more conservation action of actually increasing protection. Looking more specifically at the types of species within protected AZE sites, we found that partially or wholly protected sites contain similar percentages of each of the three taxonomic groups: mammals, birds, and amphibians. About 41% of threatened amphibians, 37% of threatened birds, and 39% of threatened mammals are at protected AZE sites. Looking at how many sites are protected for each taxonomic group, 14% of AZE sites triggered by amphibians had protected area coverage, while 57% of AZE sites triggered by birds and 30% of AZE sites triggered by mammals had protected area coverage. Looking more broadly at the 4,119 non-AZE threatened and near-threatened birds, mammals, and amphibians globally, about 75% have spatial ranges which overlap with AZE sites. Of that 75%, about 70% have ranges which overlap with protected AZE sites. For AZE species, this number is about 46%. This difference can be attributed to the fact that non-AZE species likely have larger ranges than AZE species. Looking at the amount of these ranges which overlap with protected areas, however, AZE species have more. On average, 43% of their range covered by protected areas, as compared to the 21% of non-AZE critically endangered and endangered species. Overall, it is encouraging to see that protection of AZE sites has improved significantly since 2005. Nonetheless, 32% of sites still have no protection. Increasing protection of these sites would benefit not only the 1,483 AZE species located there, but also the additional 1,359 critically endangered and endangered amphibian, bird, and mammal species that occur at AZE sites. Protecting the ranges of AZE species should be prioritized, since these species are at the highest risk of extinction. Particular attention and increased monitoring should be given to amphibians, since only 14% of sites triggered by amphibians are protected. Beyond just the implementation of protection, effective management of protected areas is critical. If we are to prevent extinctions of the world's most threatened species, both the protection and the effective management of AZE sites should remain a high priority on a local, regional, national, and global level, and should be included in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you.